Hi, and welcome to today's Daily Chronicle. Today is Friday, November 22nd, 2024. A hunk of space junk, crashed through his roof in Florida. Who should pay to fix it? In March 2021, mission controllers in Houston used Canadarm2 robot arm to release an external pallet packed with old nickel hydrogen batteries from the International Space Station. 3 years later, part of that assembly struck a house in Naples, Florida. Alejandro Otero was out of town on vacation last month when his son called from their house in Naples, Florida, to tell him something shocking and incredible. His son, 19, had been home alone when he heard an extremely loud crash and realized it came from inside the house. When he called to give me the news, he asked us to make sure we were sitting down to hear what he had to tell us, Otero told NPR. He wasn't even sure how to tell me what happened. We had to look and listen to the security cameras to try to piece together what caused the loud crashing sound, he said. It looked like it caused the whole house to shake. So we weren't sure if there had been an earthquake or what. When he saw the hole coming through the house, he realized something fell through. Mystery object is finally identified. After rushing back home, Otero called the sheriff's department, and a deputy who came to the house pulled a hunk of metal out of the floorboards. It was not like anything I had ever seen before, Otero said. He quickly realized the object was a meteorite. It was cylindrical, and while one end was melted by the heat of re-entry, the other had a smooth round shape with a circular indentation. A shallow and uniform groove ran down its side. Otero set out to learn what the object was. Posting images and video online, he landed on likely, yet extraordinary suspect, a large battery pallet from the International Space Station that NASA released for an uncontrolled re-entry 3 years ago. The European Space Agency had warned that the batteries and pallet would re-enter the atmosphere in the early afternoon of March 8th. Otero's house was hit that day, shortly after 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The location of re-entry was predicted by the 18th Space Defense Squadron to be in the Gulf of Mexico. The Aerospace Corporation, a research and development nonprofit that advises the U.S. government, said in a statement to NPR. Naples, Florida was directly downrange of that location and in the direction that the debris would have been traveling. NASA retrieved the object from Otero's home, and it recently confirmed the object was part of the battery pallet, a remnant of some 5,800 pounds of hardware that was jettisoned from the space station. The space object was a stanchion, NASA said, that held the batteries on a cargo pallet. The surviving object was a little smaller than a soda can and made of Inconel, a superalloy that is strong and heat resistant. We feel very lucky and blessed. When the object hit Otero's house in southwest Florida, his son was just a couple rooms over from the impact point. We can't help but think what could have happened if it came through just a little to the right or to the left. How much more disastrous the situation could have been, Otero said. We feel very lucky and blessed that everyone was okay. But the incident also prompted immediate concern, from how to deal with a hole in the roof to whether this object might be dangerous or toxic. For a while, Otero's son was on his own. Being alone at the house was worrisome because he didn't know if the debris was hazardous or what it was, Otero said via email. That concern grew, Otero said. When he later realized the object may have been linked to a power module used in space, once NASA got in touch with us, my lawyer asked for reasonable assurance from them that the item was not toxic or hazardous, Otero said. NASA was able to give the assurance, and his family was relieved that the agency didn't send people in hazmat suits to receive the object. The hardware was expected to fully burn up during entry through Earth's atmosphere. NASA said after conducting its analysis. The agency is working to figure out how part of it hit Otero's house, adding that it may need to tweak the engineering models it uses to estimate how objects break up during atmospheric re-entry. The incident highlights concerns over the amount of space junk on Earth's orbit, and it raises a rare and complicated question. Who should pay to repair a home that's hit by debris plummeting from orbit, filing a claim on damage from a space object? When asked how much damage the space object caused, Otero says his homeowner's insurance set the adjusted cost at more than $15,000, adding that he's also been evaluating other damages not covered by insurance. We are in the process of sending NASA our claim, which will include the insurance and non-insurance damages, he says, adding that his lawyer has been in touch with NASA's legal counsel. Otero says his insurer quickly helped in bringing in contractors to do repair work. So, who might finally be held liable for this sort of damage when an object launched into space crashes into someone's home? This is kind of unprecedented, Mark Sundal, who had worked in space law for more than 20 years, told NPR determined liability in some cases can be complicated, he said. It will depend on whose module of the space station that came from, said Sundal, who is director of the Global Space Law Center at Cleveland State University. We have an international convention on liability for damage caused by outer space objects. It's from 1972, so we have rules in place. If space debris falls back to Earth, Sundal said, the launching state is absolutely liable for any damage to property or persons that occurs in the surface of the Earth. There's a different rule for incidents in space. He added, if one satellite hits another satellite there, it's not absolute strict liability. You have to show fault. But when something lands on an innocent person and it's in their house, that's strict reliability. But Sundal added, if the object in question turns out to be part of a U.S. module, then the international law no longer applies. It becomes a domestic legal issue, and a homeowner would have to bring a tort action against the federal government. In the Naples incident, the object seems to be of U.S. origin. NASA says the stanchion came from NASA's flight support equipment. The agency didn't immediately respond to an inquiry from NPR about possible liability. Has anything like this happened before? We had a major accident involving an object falling out of orbit decades ago, Sundahl said. In 1978, a Soviet satellite, Cosmos 954, disintegrated over Canada and scattered a radioactive fuel across the country. He said, and they helped clean it up. In accordance with international law, they paid expenses. About once every week, Europe's space agency says, and a large space object re-enters the atmosphere, with the majority of the associated fragments burning up before reaching the ground. There have been many cases of space program debris re-entering Earth's orbit and not burning up completely before falling into the surface, Sundahl says. But those usually fall into the ocean. He's not aware of any confirmed reports of man-made space objects causing damages, as in Florida recently. There is at least one documented case of a person being hurt by something falling from the heavens. A woman in Alabama was struck by a meteorite that crashed into her home in 1954. She survived with a bruise. But that case didn't involve space debris. And in 1997, an Oklahoma woman was outside when she was tapped on by the shoulder by a piece of mesh from a Delta II rocket. So this is something new. In Florida, said Sundahl, whose group recently hosted a symposium on threats posed by orbital debris. The U.S. is currently tracking nearly 45,000 objects in orbit, including some 18,000 pieces of space debris, according to the spacetrack.org. U.S. Space Command's public website. I don't think, and it's an exaggeration to say, that's the greatest existing threat to humanity, use of outer space. They were polluting the orbits to the extent where it could become difficult to use them at all, Sundahl said. He says he's very optimistic that changes to law and policies can reduce or eliminate threats to orbit-based systems. We're also reliant on space infrastructure in so many different ways, he said. The International Space Station, which is roughly the size of a football field, is itself a deorbit plan. As it nears the end of its useful life, after more than 2 decades of continuous human occupancy, NASA says the station will remain operational unit until at least 2030, and is planning on a controlled re-entry targeted into a remote, uninhabited area in the ocean. As for Otero, he says, there are a lot of lessons to be learned from this event. I hope no one else has to go through this. It was really scary for our whole family, and we are just grateful that no one got physically hurt. The International Space Station adjusts its orbit to avoid space debris. In this handout photo released by Roscosmos Space Agency Press Service, a view of the International Space Station takes on March 30th, 2022, by a crew of Russian Soyuz MS-19 spaceship after undocking from the station. NASA says that the International Space Station, ISS, shifted its orbit on Tuesday to avoid a piece of debris. The debris avoidance maneuver involved firing thrusters on the ISS at 2:09 p.m. for 5 minutes 31 seconds, according to the NASA. This adjustment raised the ISS orbit to provide an extra margin of distance from a piece of orbital debris from a defunct defense meteorological satellite that broke up in 2015, the agency says. Had the maneuver not been conducted, the debris would have come within nearly 2.5 miles of the station. NASA also says the debris was small. U.S. Space Force's Space tells NPR. NASA says that the agency and other ISS partners were made aware of the potential conjunction risk on Sunday. The agency, along with the U.S. Space Force and other partners, monitored the debris before deciding to carry out the maneuver, NASA says. The time required to move the ISS away from space debris depends on many factors. The agency tells NPR, adding that NASA and its partners can respond within a few hours if required to mitigate the risk of a potential collision. Dodging the debris had no impact on station operations. The agency says it also did not affect the upcoming launch of the Progress 90 spacecraft, which is an unpiloted mission to deliver food and supplies aboard the ISS. That launch is set for Thursday. The ISS, which travels at least 17,500 miles per hour, is in orbit in an environment filled with hundreds of satellites and thousands of pieces of space debris. This was the first time that the ISS implemented a maneuver to dodge space debris this year, and the 39th time proactive measures have been taken to avoid debris since its launch in 1998, NASA says. In October 2022, the ISS also fired its thrusters for 5 minutes and 5 seconds to dodge a piece of debris from a Russian satellite. The U.S. has cataloged 19,000 pieces of space debris in Earth's orbit, not including active satellites. The U.S. Space Force's Space tells NPR. Additionally, NASA's Orbital Debris Program Office says there are about 9,000 metric tons of material orbiting Earth. Most of the debris is lower orbit, is moving very fast, and can reach speeds of 18,000 miles per hour, NASA says. While space debris poses minimal risks to people on Earth, a significant amount burns up when re-entering the atmosphere. It can have serious consequences on spacecraft such as the ISS, and can endanger astronauts conducting spacewalks outside of the station. According to the Aerospace Corporation, which supports national security space programs, even a small blueberry-sized piece of space debris can create the impact of a falling anvil, and a collision with a small piece can involve considerable energy, NASA says. Some spacecraft are often struck by very small, sub-millimeter sized debris with little to no impact. Currently, there are no binding international rules governing the management and prevention of growth debris in space. However, countries such as the US, Russia, China, Japan, France, and the European Space Agency have all established guidelines. These guidelines primarily involve the design and operation of new spacecraft in a way that won't make the problem worse. There are also new technologies being tested to try to remove debris already out there. The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Nat and Gayant. In London, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants on Thursday for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Nat and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity in the Gaza Strip. The court's decision followed allegations leveled in May by the ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan. Those allegations, which underpinned the warrants, focus on the period between October 8, 2023 and May 20th, 2024, and encompass the alleged use of starvation as a method of warfare, and intentionally directing an attack against the civilian population, as well as, the prosecutor's team said, was the deliberate targeting of medical facilities and restrictions on medical and humanitarian supplies. Israel, whose earlier attempts to challenge the ICC's jurisdiction were denied by the court, rejects the charges against Net and Gallant. The country's president, Isaac Herzog, called the decision to issue arrest warrants outrageous and said the court had turned the concept of universal justice into a universal laughingstock. Net's office said it utterly rejects the false and absurd charges and called the decision anti-Semitic. The ICC also issued a warrant Thursday for the arrest of Mohammed Deif, Hamas military chief, for crimes against humanity and war crimes. Israel said in August that it had killed Deif, but Hamas was not confirmed Deif's death, and the ICC said the prosecution was not yet in position to determine his status. Khan, the chief prosecutor, had previously sought arrest warrants for two other Hamas leaders, Yahya Sinwar and Ismail Haniyeh, but withdrew those requests as both men have since been confirmed dead. The warrant issued Thursday for Deif is tied to the Hamas-led October 7, 2023 assault on Israel, which sparked the current war. Authorities in Israel say more than 1,200 people were killed in the October 7th attack, and some 250 were taken hostage in Gaza. In issuing the warrant, the court's pretrial chamber determined there were reasonable amounts to believe that Deif, also known as Mohammed Daib Ibram, was responsible for crimes against humanity, including murder, extermination, torture, and rape, as well as war crimes that included murder, cruel treatment, torture, taking hostages, outrages upon personal dignity, and rape. While Israel and Hamas have repeatedly denied the prosecutor's allegations against their respective leaders, Hamas hailed the warrants against the two Israelis in a statement as an important historical precedent and a correction to a long path of historical injustice against our people. Israel's military action in Gaza has so far killed 44,000 people. According to the territory's health ministry that Hamas oversees, the ICC said they were responsible to believe that Net and Gayant bore criminal responsibility as civilian superiors for the war crime of intentionally directing an attack against the civilian population. The ICC's judges stood up for victims and survivors in Palestine and Israel, said Mark Kirsten, a senior consultant for the Wayemo Foundation, a Berlin-based nonprofit focused on strengthening the role of international law. It may not be that we see trials in the near future, but this is a powerful signal that the only permanent international criminal court in the world believes them and not their perpetrators. For Net and Gayant, the issuance of arrest warrants means the 124 member countries of the International Criminal Court are now under a legal obligation to arrest them on their territory. Net visited the United States recently, but the U.S. is not a signatory to the treaty that established the court, so it's not under this obligation. A U.S. National Security Council spokesperson told journalists on Thursday the United States was deeply concerned by the prosecutor's rush to seek arrest warrants and the troubling process errors that led to this decision. But some officials in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa welcomed the news. Casper Veldkamp, the foreign minister of the Netherlands, where the ICC is headquartered, told the Dutch parliament his government would no longer engage in any non-essential contacts with Net and Gayant, and would arrest the Israeli premier if he set foot in Dutch territory. And in France, a spokesperson for the foreign ministry said the country would act in line with the ICC statutes, but as to whether it would arrest Net if he entered France, the question was legally complex.